What if I told you Gaddafi's son is alive and he's back? Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, the 52-year-old once seen as the reformer of Libya, has resurfaced after years in hiding. The son of the man the West feared most, now stepping out of the shadows, ready to reclaim his father's legacy. His sudden reappearance has sent shockwaves across Libya and panic through the same Western powers that helped destroy his father's regime. To them, the ghost of Gaddafi was supposed to stay buried. But Saif's return changes everything. Libya today is a shattered nation, torn apart by militias, corruption, and foreign interference. But could this man, once the heir to Gaddafi's revolution, be the one to bring it back together? Can he rebuild the nation his father died defending? Or will history repeat itself in blood and betrayal? This is the story of Saif al-Islam Gaddafi's return and the fight to reclaim a broken Libya. The Libya we know today still lives under the ghost of one man, Muammar Gaddafi. His shadow stretches across every corner of Libya's political, economic, and cultural life. Even in death, his presence lingers, haunting a nation that once stood proudly under his rule. In 2011, everything changed. Gaddafi was hunted, betrayed, and finally killed by NATO-backed rebels. His fall was not just the end of a leader, it was the collapse of an entire system, one built on decades of oil power, nationalism, and defiance against the West. When news of his death broke, Western capitals celebrated. To them, the dictator was gone, the obstacle removed. Hillary Clinton, then U.S. Secretary of State, could barely hide her excitement. On camera, she laughed and said the now infamous words, "We came, we saw, he died."
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
The journalist beside her laughed too, a chilling moment of triumph over death. But behind that laughter lay the silence of a nation, a Libya that would soon descend into chaos. Barack Obama, the man who gave the order, who sanctioned the NATO strikes, stood before the world and called it a victory. He said Gaddafi's death meant freedom, that Libya could now, finally, determine its own destiny. A new democratic Libya, he promised. The Western media followed his lead. Headlines declared the end of dictatorship. They spoke of democracy, progress, and hope. But what came next didn't follow their script. The moment Gaddafi fell, Libya fell with him. Everything that once worked stopped. Institutions that had run the nation for decades suddenly vanished. Ministries dissolved. Government offices emptied overnight. The national army shattered into pieces, replaced by dozens of militias, each carving out their own territory, flying their own flag, and declaring themselves the true guardians of Libya. The West had promised liberation, but what they left behind was a nation in ruins. A once prosperous country, now torn apart by warlords, greed, and chaos, abandoned by the very powers that had claimed to save it. Instead of a land blessed with oil, gold, and endless water reserves, Libya has become a market of misery. Open slave markets now operate in the shadows. Smugglers and human traffickers trade human lives for money, preying on migrants desperate to reach Europe. Men and women are sold like cattle. In a country that once had one of the highest living standards in Africa, rival tribes and militias battle for control of oil fields and cities, each dreaming of power and profit. And in the chaos, something darker crept in. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other jihadist groups that would never have dared to exist under Gaddafi's rule. They now thrive in the cracks of a broken nation, spreading terror through Libya and beyond its borders. While the West congratulated itself for removing a dictator, Libya burned. The same nations that once couldn't stay out of Libya's affairs suddenly turned their backs. They watched as the country fractured into pieces, as jihadists rose, militias ruled, and the dream of democracy turned into a nightmare. They stayed silent when electricity vanished and blackouts consumed entire cities. They said nothing as hospitals ran out of medicine and students watched their universities close. The so-called liberation had turned Libya into a graveyard of promises. What does this tell you? It tells you that they never cared about Libya, not its people, not its democracy, not its future. Their mission was never liberation. It was elimination, to remove a man who stood in the way of their plans. Today, Many Libyans look back on the Gaddafi era with something Western media can't quite explain: nostalgia. They remember a time when life felt secure, when the streets were safe, when healthcare was free, education was guaranteed, housing was affordable, and fuel was cheaper than bottled water. They remember a Libya that stood on its own feet, not one begging for aid or divided by warlords. And now, from the ashes of that destroyed nation, a familiar name returns: Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, the son of the man the world tried to erase. During his father's reign, Saif was seen as the moderate, the bridge between Libya and the West. Calm, educated, and fluent in English, he was once viewed as the friendly face of the Gaddafi regime. But when the so-called revolution came and his father's world crumbled, Saif didn't run. He stood his ground. He faced the rebels and foreign forces head-on and declared, "We fight here in Libya. We die here in Libya." Those words would echo for years, a vow of loyalty and a warning to those who thought the Gaddafi legacy was dead. But fate had other plans. Despite his loyalty and defiance, Saif al-Islam couldn't save his father or Libya. After Gaddafi's brutal death, Saif fled south, racing through the desert toward Niger. But before he could cross the border, his journey ended. In the remote sands near Ubari, rebels from his own tribe, Zintan, ambushed and captured him. He was paraded as a prisoner, tried via video link by a Tripoli court for alleged crimes committed during the 2011 uprising. The International Criminal Court joined in, accusing him of crimes against humanity. The son of Gaddafi had become the symbol of everything the new Libya wanted to erase. Then, silence. Years passed, and the world forgot his name, until 2017, when the authorities from Libya's eastern faction suddenly pardoned him. He walked free, and then vanished. No public sightings, no statements, only whispers in the desert that Saif al-Islam was alive. Then, in 2021, he resurfaced, older, calmer, but not defeated. In a rare, haunting interview, Saif described his years in captivity and his vision for Libya's future. He said the country needed saving, not from outsiders, but from itself, from corruption, division, and foreign control. He spoke like a man reborn, determined to reclaim what was lost. And then came the moment that stunned everyone. Saif al-Islam Gaddafi announced that he would run for president. The elections were set for December 24, 2021, a symbolic date meant to mark Libya's rebirth. For the first time in a decade, the son of Gaddafi was officially back, ready to step out of his father's shadow and into the storm of history once more. In that interview, his words carried the weight of both defiance and destiny. "Now, I am a free man," he said, "and I am arranging to return to the political scene." After years in hiding, Saif al-Islam claimed he had used his exile wisely, studying the chaos that had consumed Libya and the Middle East, quietly rebuilding his father's old political network, the Green Movement, the same movement that once held Libya together under a single banner. He spoke with conviction, but also caution. He wasn't sure if he would run for president, yet he made one thing clear: his movement could restore what Libya had lost: unity, stability, pride. His campaign slogan struck a nerve across the country: "Politicians have given you nothing but suffering. It's time to return to the past." And he didn't stop there. His tone hardened as he described the decay of the nation he once called home. "They have raped and humiliated our country," he said. "We have no money, no security, and no life. You go to a gas station and there's no fuel. We export oil and gas to Italy. We power half of Italy, while our own people live in darkness." He paused, then added, "What is happening is beyond failure. It is a farce." It was more than a statement. It was an accusation, a declaration that the Libya built by his father had been sold, stripped, and shattered, and that only a Gaddafi could rebuild it. At the time, Libya was divided into two parallel administrations that are still vying for power today. One is from the east, in Tobruk, and the other from the west, in Tripoli. In between, the parties had to contend with the Islamist insurgency, which established a small caliphate on the coast. Even the jihadist threat did not unite their agendas. Successive UN-sponsored agreements cushioned the blows, halted hostilities by establishing a lasting ceasefire, but have proved incapable of resolving the protracted political stalemate. Saif al-Islam eventually ran in those elections, the first nationally recognized candidate to register, but the elections did not take place on time. In fact, they have not yet been held. The Government of National Unity in Tripoli and the House of Representatives in Tobruk, the institutions vying for control, cannot agree on a joint electoral law to put the process back on track. Libya's political elite remains entrenched in power in the absence of a legal text that would allow the vote to take place with guarantees. One Libyan activist puts it plainly: Libya again finds itself with two governments, neither of which has been elected or chosen by Libyans, but both of which are the product of continuous misdirection by corrupt politicians unwilling to let go of their positions of power. All of these, together with the lack of security and the deterioration of social services, have made many Libyans lose faith in the political class to the point of sometimes staging protests and riots. This therefore creates the perfect breeding ground for the emergence of a new profile to unite the discontent. Someone perceived as a leader capable of leaving the post-revolutionary crisis period behind. And the name that is being chanted on the streets and in certain circles is none other than Saif al-Islam himself. He is popular among those nostalgic for the Gaddafi regime, a spectrum made up of former officials, clans, and communities that supported Gaddafi, especially those in Tripoli's so-called Green Belt, which has a large demographic weight. According to a crisis group analyst, Saif retains some degree of support in Libya, but at the moment no one knows the real size of his support. There have been no elections in Libya for 8 years, and Saif al-Islam remains a controversial figure in many respects. His support base is highly mobilized, but he does not seem to enjoy much support from the rest of society. While Gaddafi's son still lives in secret, unconfirmed reports suggest that he is serious with his decision of reuniting Libya, although no one knows when this will happen. But some sources say that he is currently meeting tribal leaders and forming alliances, positioning himself as a national figure. Whether through elections or raw political maneuvering, Said appears ready to challenge Libya's fractured state. To some, Saif is a savior who would complete what his father began. To others, Saif is nothing but a man who is just riding on the waves of his father's influence. Some others, especially those who participated in the Libyan revolution, fear that he would retaliate if he becomes leader. However, his return to power will not be easy. Without a doubt, it will be challenged by the powerful eastern-based commander of the Libyan National Army, General Khalifa Haftar, who seems set on asserting his primacy, whether through elections or by less democratic means. Haftar is also casting himself as the person who can bring stability to Libya. In 2018, he described Saif al-Islam as naive in politics, adding that it would be illogical for him to run in elections since he lacks popular support. But Haftar may not be the best judge of Gaddafi's popularity. While Saif al-Islam has many detractors, some segments of Libyan society would like to see Gaddafi running Libya again, says Yehudit Ronen, a professor of Middle East Studies at Bar Ilan University in Ramat Gan. For those who benefited during the rule of Gaddafi but have since been relegated to the political, social, and economic margins, the moment Saif al-Islam arrives is when they can return to the circle of privilege and influence, she said. They come from Western Libya, from Tripoli, from the army, and from armed and tribal militias that cooperated for 4 decades with his father. Support for Saif al-Islam is also strong in the south of the country. Ronan adds that after the bitter experiences of recent years, even many of those who opposed his father's rule would now be willing to go along with the son, whom they despised as a means of attaining order and greater security. There is terrible violence, kidnappings, and ransom demands, she said. A person goes out in the morning and doesn't know if he will return in the afternoon. The roads are dangerous. There is no governance. There is no orderly economy. Oil exports haven't returned to what they were, and don't bring in the foreign currency needed to restore health, sewage, and other systems. It is an extremely difficult situation in the east, west, and south. Within this climate, Ronan says, there is a nostalgia among some who opposed the regime and hated Gaddafi's son. They are saying today, it was terrible, a repressive regime where people disappeared and many went to prison for their political beliefs, but there was personal security. So clearly, Saif has the support. But beside opposition from Libya's divided leadership, Saif still has to deal with the accusations of the ICC. As we earlier mentioned, the ICC accuses him of war crimes and crimes against humanity for his alleged roles in suppressing protest in 2011. So, legally, his candidacy for any leadership position should be impossible. But the fact is that Libya's current situation is anything but legalistic. There is no unjustified judiciary, no single government recognized by all Libyans, and no mechanism strong enough to enforce an international warrant. Besides this, for many Libyans, the ICC indictment does not matter. They view it as an external instrument of political control. After all, who did the ICC prosecute when NATO bombed Libya and killed citizens? Doesn't that equal a crime against humanity? Why did the ICC ignore the militias who committed brutal crimes against prisoners? Clearly, the ICC is a tool of Western control used to oppress and prosecute those deemed a threat to the West. So, any move Saif makes towards taking over control in Libya would be very much welcomed by most Libyans. The only question is, will the West sit back and watch as Gaddafi's son returns to power? Well, it's not really clear, but we do know that the West fears anything that will be a threat to them. So, if Gaddafi's son intends to fully follow the footsteps of his father, well, the West would not sit back and watch him return to power. They will do everything to ensure he never returns, including pressuring the ICC to enforce its indictment. Or what do you think? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel.